Today, I wanted to cover what I believe to be the best Prismatic Warlock build in the game. This build will give you access to near constant damage resistance, the best crowd control you can ask for, quick regeneration of Transcendence, and solid boss damage, which will allow you to be a strong component for your team. Today's video will go over the ins and outs that this build has, including how to set it up, where to acquire all the pieces necessary for this build, the best weapons and mods to pair with this build, and how to use this build effectively in order to transcend your gameplay to a point where everyone will want your help in the new Salvation's Edge raid. So with that said, I'm SniperKH, and let's hop right in. Let's start by getting into how this build is set up. In order to use this build, you will need to have access to the Prismatic subclass on the Warlock, which if you haven't yet, you can obtain it from the first mission in the Final Shape campaign. Regarding the super, I'd highly suggest you use Needlestorm, which can be obtained from the Home Part 2 adventure that is associated with the Dark Prismatic quest you get after the Final Shape campaign, and I'll explain why this is my choice of super for this build later. For the melee, I'd highly recommend you run the Arcane Needle melee, which can be obtained from the Queen's Part 2 adventure, as it grants you 3 melee charges, which will play a vital role in the build later on. For the grenade, I found Cold Snap to be the best choice for the grenade with this build, especially with the exotic that we will be pairing with this build. For the aspects, I'd suggest you run Lightning Surge and Bleak Watchers. Lightning Surge, which you can obtain from the Hollow Part 1 adventure, plays an important role as it allows you to get access to Amplified, which will be one of 2 major sources of damage resistance that this build has to offer. Furthermore, pairing this aspect with the Arcane Needle melee means you'll have 3 charges of Lightning Surge, which makes ad clear a breeze. When it comes down to Bleak Watchers, this will give you access to one of the strongest forms of crowd control that Destiny 2 has to offer, and thanks to Cold Snap Grenade's moderate cooldown timer, you'll be able to spam these turns all over the battlefield. Now with us choosing those 2 aspects, that leaves us with 6 fragment slots, so to populate them we will be equipping the following fragments. For starters, begin with Facet of Dawn to give yourself an easy source of Radiant, which is a nice damage boost to your weapons, and since you'll be meleeing quite a bit with this build, you should have constant damage buff for your weapons. You can also give yourself an additional source of Radiant via the Radiant Orbs artifact mod, though I don't find it necessary for this build. The second fragment of choice will be Facet of Ruin, which will increase the size and damage of the burst that you do when shattering targets, which will happen often thanks to Bleak Watchers. For the third fragment, you'll want to run Facet of Protection, as you'll be around enemies a lot due to your Lightning Surge melees, so this fragment will ensure that dying is a lot harder than without it. For the fourth fragment, I chose Facet of Purpose, as picking up an Orb of Power will grant you an elemental buff that is according to the super you use. If you remember earlier, I mentioned that you'd want to run Needlestorm, and the reason for that is that you'll get access to Woven Mail for 5 seconds with this fragment, which is even more damage resistance to add onto the already existing damage resistances that you have. For the fifth fragment, I went with Facet of Devotion, as the main issue I found with this build was that I was struggling to build the light meter for Transcendence, but thanks to this fragment, building the light bar should be much easier. For the sixth and final fragment, I chose Facet of Blessing, as this will start health regeneration as long as you get a melee kill, which should be fairly easy with this build. So now that we have set up the subclass, we need to pair this build with the correct exotic, and for that I've chosen Osmiomantic Gloves, as this will let you get a second Cold Snap Grenade, letting you have the opportunity to throw 2 Bleak Watcher turrets onto the field, which will increase your crowd control potential tenfold. However, with the release of exotic class items being around the corner, we'll have access to combinations that will be disgusting for this subclass. Regarding what perks you'll want to get on your exotic class item for this build, the Spirit of Osmiomancy is a must-have for this build, but for column 2, you can choose between Spirit of the Star Eater to empower your super's damage even further, Spirit of the Syntheseps to increase the damage of your Lightning Surge, or Spirit of the Claw to gain a 4th Lightning Surge charge. For me personally, I will be grinding for a Spirit of the Osmiomancy and Spirit of the Syntheseps role, as I think this role will empower this build to levels we've never seen before. Regarding what exotic weapon to pair with this build, there isn't one that I've found that pairs with this build perfectly, so I chose to run Sunshot as a solid ad clear weapon. Something else I'd like to mention for this build is that having a weapon that has access to perks like Demolitionist or Pugilist will be great, as increasing the regeneration of your abilities will prove to be amazing with this build. Because of that, I chose to pair this build with the Call Rocket Sidearm that can be found in the Pale Heart, as it can roll with Demolitionist and Hatchling, which are both great perks for this build. Regarding the mods for this build, there are quite a few to cover. Beginning with the helmet, I'd recommend 2 stacks of hands-on to build your super faster, especially since you'll be getting a fair amount of melee kills with this build. For your gauntlets, I'd recommend heavy-handed to spawn an orb on a powered melee kill, to which lightning surge counts towards that. This orb that you spawn will be your gateway to getting woven mail thanks to Facet of Purpose, which I covered earlier in this video. Continuing with the gauntlet mods, I recommend 2 stacks of momentum transfer, as dealing damage with the Bleak Watchers will build your melee back faster, and if you choose to pair a demolitionist weapon with this build, then grenade regeneration will not be a concern for you. For your boots, having recuperation will give you a small bump to your health from picking up an orb, which will be useful after diving yourself into a group of adds. Additionally, 2 stacks of invigoration would be smart here in order to help you build your melee back faster with orb power pickups. Moving on to the class item, 2 stacks of outreach will further ensure that your melee comes back fast. The final armor mod I'd recommend you pair with this build would be Bomber to give you a slight boost to your grenade regeneration to make your grenade come back fast. With this build, we will also be utilizing 3 artifact mods, with those being Galvanic Armor to grant you the damage resistance for Amplified, Transference to increase your grenade and melee damage while Transcendence, and Shield Crush to increase both your grenade and melee damage since you'll be having access to Amplified and Radiant for the grenade damage, and Woven Mail for the melee damage boosts respectively. Overall, using this build will help elevate your gameplay to new heights that would otherwise be harder to reach. This build can also succeed in the brand new raid that Bungie just released, and I guarantee that if you use this build effectively, you will have the ad clear roll down and your teammates will thank you for it. Well, that'll wrap up today's video. If you found it useful, then be sure to drop a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more Destiny 2 content dropping soon. If you'd like to come catch me live, then be sure to turn on post notifications here on YouTube and follow me on my Twitch channel as I go live on both platforms fairly often, and I'd love to see you guys over there. Finally, follow my social media platforms linked below to keep up to date with my new content and all the other shenanigans I get up to on a daily basis. With that being said, I'm SniperKH, and I'm out. Good luck with gaming.